You created code to connect to a database using the SqlClient namespace in Lesson 9.5. In this lesson, you'll continue to use the SqlClient namespace to execute a SQL query and retrieve the results. To begin, open the Market Trader project from your Sample Files folder. And open dataaccess.cs. You're now going to add some code to the getMarketQuotes method to specify a SQL query. Add the following code inside the second using statement. Command.commandText equals select quote date quote value from quote where market ID equals plus market ID plus order by quote date. This code provides a SQL query for the SQL command object. The query will retrieve the quote date and quote value fields from the quote table for records with the specified market ID. The results will be sorted by quote date. Note that the SQL query will not be sent to the database until you call one of the execute methods of the SQL command object. It's also important to note that sending SQL code directly to the database can make your application vulnerable to SQL injection attacks. You'll learn more about SQL injection attacks in Lesson 9.11. It is possible to use the SqlClient classes in a secure way, but it's better to use LINQ instead. Next, you'll need to add some code to execute the SQL query and retrieve the results. Add the following code on the next line inside the using statement. SQL data reader equals command.executeReader. This code sends the SQL query to the database and places the results in a new SQL data reader object. Note that the SQL command object has a few alternative methods to send different types of SQL code to the database. ExecuteReader is used for queries that return multiple results, as in this example. ExecuteNonReader is used for queries that do not return any results, such as update commands. Instead, this method returns the number of rows affected by the query. And ExecuteScalar is used for queries that only return a single result. This method will discard all results after the first. Next, you'll need to add some code to extract the results from the SQL data reader object and return them as a list collection of quote objects. Add the following code on the very first line of the method. List quote quotes to return equals new list quote. You're going to extract the results into this collection. You placed this code on the first line of the event handler so that it will be available outside the using statements. Next, add the following while loop on the next line inside the second using statement. While reader.read. This while loop cycles through all of the database records that are contained in the SQL Data Reader object. The read method tells the SQL Data Reader object to move to the next record. It returns false if there are no more records left. Now add the following code inside the while loop. Quote, new quote, equals new quote dot quote date equals date time reader quote date new quote dot quote value equals decimal reader quote value quotes to return dot add new quote. This code creates a new quote object, populates it with the values from the SQL Data Reader object, and adds it to the quotes to return collection. Now add the following code after the end of the second using statement. Connection dot close. This code closes the connection to the database. And finally, add the following code to the very end of the method. Return quotes to return. This code returns the list of quotes, completing your method. Now let's test your code. View marketdata.aspx in your web browser. And click Get Data. The database records are displayed on the page. As you have seen, the SqlClient classes require a huge amount of code compared to LINQ. My advice is to always use LINQ, but you may need this understanding to support legacy code that was written using an older version of ASP.NET. Close your web browser now and close Visual Studio. You've now completed Lesson 9.6. Run a SQL query using the SqlClient namespace.